What's up, everybody? This is Phil Rogacki.
And I'm Jared Abergina.
You're listening to Two Tree Guys Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Two Tree Guys Podcast. Today, we got something pretty special. We're going to be doing our first crane talk. We got some industry experts in the house today, Mr. Elemer Ivan, Jeff Stutt, and Brian Hooper. We'll be going over our topic today is going to be talking about knuckleboom cranes compared to stick boom cranes. And this is something I think in the industry we have a lot of questions, especially tree care industry. Why would I use a stick crane? Why would I use a knuckleboom crane? And especially when you get into the point of acquiring one of the two is why? And I think some education around the specifics behind each one of these cranes and their use would be very helpful. I know it was for me. So we'll dive a little deeper. I'll go ahead and introduce Elemer Ivan here and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I've been around hydraulics most of my life. My father brought me up around hydraulic cylinders, so out around cranes over 35 years, servicing them, repairing them, installing them. Today, I own BIK Hydraulics, BIK boom trucks, and we furnish truck-mounted unloaders, both knuckleboom and stick boom cranes.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Elemer. Mr. Jeff Stutt.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I've been in the truck industry for 35 years. I hate to admit that because I feel 18. And I've been at BIK for 25 years selling alongside of Elemer.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. And Mr. Brian Hooper.
Started a long time ago as a diesel technician and always around trucks and hydraulic stuff all my life. And found Elemer some 20 years ago in a technical role and segued into sales with him and Jeff and now doing some business development and get the name of the company out there. So.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot of experience sitting here at the table. So for you guys listening, this is a great opportunity to soak all this in, especially you guys that are live out here on Instagram. If you guys got any questions throughout here, throw them out there at the end of this talk. We'll go live with you, and hopefully any questions you have, these pros in the industry can help out answering them. So like I said, the talk today, we're going to be talking about, and I don't like to use the word verse, just a comparison. We want to hear some pros and cons of the different cranes, knuckleboom and stick booms, and hopefully shed some light on when and where and how to apply these cranes for our use in the tree care industry. So we'll be going over some specs on a lot of these cranes as well. And so we're gonna dive right into it. And Jeff, we were speaking a little bit earlier about the use of these cranes and kind of where it started from stick cranes and knuckleboom cranes. Could you shed some light a little bit on that?
Going back, I guess, when I first started in the industry 25 years ago, the stick booms were prevalent. Knucklebooms really didn't have any place in the industry. The first industry that knucklebooms really came into would be, say, precast concrete would probably be the first area that we delved into. Stick booms were mostly for erection and construction, and knucklebooms worked their way into material handling and unloading, even load placement over time. So originally, stick booms were the only thing you had. Other than block and brick unloaders, really, or maybe a drywall boom, which is an articulating boom, of course. The knuckleboom came in and was a lighter, more efficient unloader that you could build on a smaller footprint truck that could do any job out there with attachments on them. And the stick boom didn't have any of that. So that's where that started.
So the question is why? Why were stick cranes more prevalent for construction and lifting than and knucklebooms more were for material handling?
Well, do you want to go ahead with that?
Sure. It's if you ask me, even though I've been around these cranes for over 35 years, I'll say I don't really know. You go back, you've seen stick booms. Here's what I observed over the years. I mean, in North America, we primarily use stick boom cranes for many, many years. When you go to Europe, they primarily use folding, knuckleboom, articulating booms, and not stick boom cranes for many of the applications that stick booms are used in North America.
Like, I think if you look at Europe, that's a great topic. The roads aren't built for big trucks.
Yeah.
And all the stick booms are these big trucks that have to go out. And knuckle booms you could build on a smaller footprint. So they could manage the getting in and out of areas. And I think that's probably why Europe was like the leader in that technology.
Yeah.
Stick boom cranes, you have to contend with a longer arm. Yeah, and you also subsequently have more reach. So we've seen stick boom cranes, or even going back many years, even crawler cranes here. We have a long stick with a cable to erect and put materials in place on construction sites, where knuckle booms are compact. I mean, you have more extensions because the extensions are shorter. You can fold it. But like Jeff said, the beginnings of what I noticed knuckle booms is really material handling, where stick booms, you have this long 25-foot or 20-foot long stick, whereas, when you're loading something off a truck, you need the boom to be a minimal reach, shorter reach. So many of the knuckle booms, when I first saw them in North America, were, 15, 20, 25-foot reach unloaders.
Yeah.
And then they start to evolve into a longer reach for different applications over the decades, to the point where we are today, is now you see knuckle booms almost replicate what stick booms can do, as far as being 100 feet and more in reach, having such options or having such features on knuckle booms, such as cable winches. So if you make that knuckle boom completely straight in a horizontal or vertical angle and run a cable to the tip, you can almost replicate with a knuckle boom what you can do with a stick boom.
Yeah, so they've come a long way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but if you take a look at the tree industry, that's a great example, because if you had a stick boom and you had to open it up around a canopy of trees, it would be almost impossible to get that up. Whereas a knuckle boom, you can unfurl and weave your way through. It's actually easier to get in and out. You're not breaking trees that you're not taking down. So it just work much more efficient in those areas.
Right,
Sure.
right. And boom accessibility, I think, is one, definitely. Where a stick crane, where typically having to go out and you're just lifting and lowering, or vice versa, where a knuckle boom, you can scope in underneath comm lines, or, it's just, it's more versatile, and you can get it in areas where a stick crane has to go over.
Even working next to a house, and you would go up and then over with your jib.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to do that, even if you're not cutting with the grapple saw, but instead just climbing and rigging a tree and hauling it out over the house.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be able to do that with a knuckle. A stick, you might not be able to access it because of your angle and getting back to the tree.
Right. So let's move right into, we're talking about the comparisons here of the two. And one common thing that I hear, it gets confusing, is, well, metric versus standard, right? And these are, it's easy to get confused with this. First, it's hard to explain to some people,
Sure.
and they're like, well, I don't get it. Well, why doesn't, I run a 40-ton Manatech, and what is that in a knuckle boom, So can you guys share some of that?
So absolutely. I mean, in North America, in the tree care industry, let's just face it, for many, many years, many tree care companies have owned stick boom cranes or rent them. So, most people can relate to, I'll get that 40-ton stick boom crane, or that 30-ton, or that 50-ton stick boom crane. And those who operate stick booms understand, well, what does a 50-ton mean? It's typically 50 tons in close. And what is in close? Typically, I see it around the 6-foot mark, give or take. 5, 6, 7-foot radius is usually a standard way in North America. Seems to be, where when you have any make model, you have 2 or 3 or 4, 5 manufacturers out there. Their 50-ton is relatively similar as far as capacity, or their 30-ton is relatively similar. So you understand what a 30 or 50-ton is at that 6-foot radius. With a knuckle boom, I think there's a lot of confusion out there. Like, okay, what is a 65 metric ton? What does that? What does a ton meter mean? And just to simplify it down in simplest terms, I would say if you're looking at a 65 for instance, I'm using this as an example because there's many metric ton meter knuckle booms, all the way from a little 2-ton meter that can fit in your pickup truck size, like a really small one, all the way up to a 200 metric ton, sometimes even way bigger on some applications. So a 65 metric ton is literally 65 tons at 1 meter. 1 meter is equivalent to just over 3 feet. So it seems to be in Europe that is a standard that knuckle boom manufacturers use. It's their first measurement at the 3-foot radius. Not that you're going to lift
Anything
something
at
that says
3
65
feet.
ton at 3 feet, but they have to start somewhere. That's the strongest point, if
Right.
you will.
And that's a theoretical engineering rating, the ton meter, right? So it's 3.28. It's about a yard, I guess, 3
Right.
feet. So it's like you said, it's never going to do it, Elmer, but they
Generally,
all
generally
are
what
judged
I do
accordingly.
is divide by 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At
So,
the
if
end.
So that's a good
50-ton
conversion.
stick,
Yeah.
that's roughly a 25-ton rating for your knuckle. Do you know what I mean? So
Yep.
that's the same type of pick. That's generally how I equate it.
So many people ask that, well, okay, that 100 metric ton, what is a 100 metric ton knuckle boom equivalent to? Well, like Jeff just said, 50 ton or
50
40,
ton.
anywhere from 45 to 50 ton. I don't think there's an exact metric, but it's in that range. 45 to 50 ton stick boom would equate to approximately 100 metric ton knuckle boom.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's great right there. Just having that knowledge of, for people to just divide by 2. Simple as that.
It's a quick way. And ultimately, it's close enough. Like it's not exact, but it's close enough to give you an idea. And the difference then becomes the size of the footprint of the truck that you can put that. So if you had a 50-ton stick boom, that truck would be 40 feet long. And you'd have no payload and you'd have no deck space. But if you had a 100-ton meter knuckle boom, you'd have deck space, you'd have capacity to carry down the road, and you'd have a much smaller truck. You'd have a truck that could be as short as about 30 feet. So big difference.
Yeah.
So
That's a big difference.
Just to lend to what Jeff is saying, so that 50-ton Manitex 5128 or a 4128, you see those trucks on a single steer tri-drive, or maybe a tandem, and those things weigh in the 70s, like 74 to 76,000 pounds very easily, and you can't carry a payload. It's just basically enough to be able to carry itself, and you definitely need overweight permits in most states. Where equivalent knuckle boom, 100 metric ton unit, that would be in the low 60s, could be as low as 61, 62, 63,000 pounds empty weight. So that's a significant difference, when it comes to, ground penetration, weight, and even being able to carry a payload.
Yeah. And that makes a huge difference, especially in the tree care world, right? We're setting up in people's yards.
Actually, that's a good point as well, ground penetration, because the difference between the other major difference between a stick and a knuckle is outriggers versus stabilizers. So when you have 5 stabilizers on a stick boom, all your weight is on those pressure points. Whereas a knuckle boom, all your weight's still on your truck. You're stabilizing it with your stabilizers rather than outriggers. So the weight spread out over a bigger area, less damage to driveways, less chance of sinking into the ground.
Yeah. So this is a great topic here, and this kind of flows into our footprint, which is great. Is just talking about overall footprints, knuckle booms versus stick. But at the same time, this was great. Typically, when you see stick cranes, they're getting them off the ground. We have a much larger footprint of an outrigger. Big steel plates.
Right.
That you're gonna take off and slap on, and all the dunnage and outrigger pads you got to put on there. So, opposed to a knuckle boom, they're much smaller. Right? They're
because you don't have all the pressure. An outrigger, you're lifting the entire truck. So if you've got your truck and it weighs 74,000 pounds, like that, 40-ton wood, you've got it all on 5 pressure points. So you're gonna have a lot more stabilizer pads and stuff to hold that weight. Whereas ours in a knuckle would be spread out over a big area. So it makes it less ground pressure per square inch of what's on the ground.
Right. So keeping that truck on the ground is a huge component to
There it is.
the stability of that crane.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, knuckle boom still requires the same type of, dunnage, spreading of the pressure as we do with the stabilizer pads, and similar dynamics are in effect, when stabilizing or ground pressure. So you still need to have all those stabilizer pads and dunnage to ensure that you're 100%
So
stable.
on the topic of outriggers, what about, accessibility and how these outriggers go out? I've been in situations where, I bring a 70-ton crane out and I think I can get it over that curb or that, up that little slope, and I can't do it because the outriggers are just basically downriggers.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the comparison to Knuckleboom versus stick cranes on that?
Because our trucks are shorter, our outriggers are generally closer to the tires. So if you're going up or down a slope, your tires and the outriggers all lift at the same time, versus when they're spread back further on a stick boom and they're running into the ground prior to. So you end up having to put down some dunnage just to get your truck up into that spot. So it can be a lot of work for sure.
Yeah.
And some of the models, actually, we can tip the outrigger up and pin it out of the way. So that's a nice feature too.
Yeah.
So you're kind of a little more off-roading, like you mentioned, curbs and other hazards.
Yep. I've definitely found going up steep grades and driveways, I can get, obviously I have the 104 and I can get up much steeper grades without scraping my outriggers in the rear. Major benefit, opposed to them sitting back, like you said, maybe 3-4 feet off the back tire, right. Causing it to be very difficult to get up those steep grades. What you mentioned, Brian, was really good. And I think accessibility in yards and trying to get that full extension of your outriggers is key. I'm talking, going over curbs, slopes, or retaining walls even, and being able to get that outrigger all the way past there, and then it rotates, right? So we can move that outrigger up, pin it up and down to get that clearance that we need.
Absolutely.
It's been an absolute game changer. Yeah, I mean, there's talking about that footprint. Is there a major difference in Knucklebooms versus stick cranes as far as the overall footprint?
On a stick boom crane, typically you see counterweights, and the more counterweight there is on a stick boom, at the back end of the turret and behind, you find that's to compensate for the spread of stabilizer legs. So a stick boom crane would have the advantage of having less spread on the because on the opposite end you got a counterweight, but there's also then a tail swing. So if you're parked up against a wall or against traffic, and you're operating on curbside, and on the driver's side, it's traffic going by. Well, if you turn your stick boom crane towards facing the operating area, which is the curbside, on the other end, you can have a tail swing of the counterweight, which could stick out as much as 6-7 feet.
Yeah.
So where a Knuckleboom, you can short jack on that driver's side and not have any component of the crane or stick up beyond the side of the truck. But then you have a stabilizer leg, your outrigger, fully deployed on the curb side for the Knuckleboom, but it'll be wider. It's a wider span. So typically you'll see a wider span on Knucklebooms because Knuckleboom does not employ a counterweight.
Yeah.
And therefore does not have a tail swing on the opposite end. So we found that selling a lot of larger, long reach Knucklebooms into the New York City market, in particular in Brooklyn and Manhattan, where they're in tight laneways. There's a situation where there's a 13-foot laneway. Imagine a 13-foot laneway with 2 8-story buildings, and you got 13 feet, and you're trying to put an air conditioner unit on top of a roof on one of those 8-story buildings. Well, one of our units was able to fit in that 13-foot. They short jacked on the one side, literally 6 inches out from the side of the truck. The opposite side, they were able to extend the leg just barely 4 feet. And it was enough to be able to lift up this air conditioner unit that weighed 1,000 pounds, go up on a 86-degree angle to clear the 8 stories, and go over the roof with the jib.
Yes.
And that you could not have accomplished that with a traditional stick boom crane.
Right.
So that's just example of a compact nature of not having to deal with the overhang or the tail swing of a counterweight on the stick boom.
Yeah.
The other, and to speak to the comparison, is the convoluted positions that you can put a knuckle boom in. You can, take your primary boom down and then run your secondary boom into a negative angle, and you can be placing goods in the front window of a building. So like what Elmer explained, you can do those large vertical lifts, but the way that you can move your booms into negative angles and even subgrade work. You could go over a retaining wall, shoot the jib downward or the outer boom sections.
Yeah.
So and you don't have the wire rope to contend with at the same time. And Elmer made a good comment earlier, was about moving the boom positions while laden. Mm-hmm. That's another great feature of a knuckle boom crane. You've got that weight on the hook or grapple or whatever the application, mm-hmm. and you can retract and do various maneuvers safely and with a short truck and be stable. So when you put all those features together, it's great to make those comparisons for you to be.
So let me paint a picture real quick for the tree people listening, and I'm just going to tell a quick story about a setup that I had to kind of talk about accessibility. I had to remove a liquid amber that was behind a big live oak tree. So most of the tree, 50, 60% of that tree, I was able to go over the live oak and start reducing that tree down. And they got to a certain point where I couldn't scope down enough to get the rest of the tree. Well, with the low overhanging branches of that live oak were maybe, 30, 35 feet off the ground. So I was able to get the rest of the stick of that liquid amber by going underneath the live oak, shooting underneath the lowest branch, and then bringing the tip of the jib up into it and then grappling the wood down all the way down to the very bottom. So, obviously, could I have done that with a stick crane? Yes. I could have just used a cable to winch down and get it. But in that sense, it's still versatile enough as a knuckle boom crane to do a tree like that, where people would say, okay, well, it's not very practical. Well, it is, because it can do it. So,
and that truck of yours is about 27 foot long, which you've got the other truck in there.
What's that? I'm sorry. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So
weight wise, I wouldn't, because I was on the lawn.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so short and compact, you could get into that spot. So
yeah. Yep. So great. We'll talk. I want to talk a little bit about I'm getting hung up on these outriggers because this is a very important part of these setups, and I just want to talk about short jacking real quick, and just talking about when we're reducing those to you said 4 feet, or let's say 50%. How much are we reducing percentage wise off of that crane? And how does that compare to a stick crane? Are we still stay as strong as a stick crane when we're reducing to 50%?
So all the knuckle booms that we sell with a jib or anything with extremely long reach, and most knuckle booms in the market that you'll find have deployment sensors. So in other words, your stabilizer beams, how far you put your legs out for the spread. If you fully extend your stabilizer legs to the side, it generally give you 100% of the load chart of the crane. If you extend it halfway out, then it'll reduce the ability. It has a sensor to tell the computer, okay, you're only deployed halfway. We're going to reduce your load capacity by X amount to match the position of your stabilizer leg at that moment.
Yeah.
If you're short jacking, a lot of times it won't even let you turn it to that side. In other words, it sort of operator proof, if you will, mm-hmm. to not allow the truck to tip or be in that compromised position to flip. So that's what deployment sensors do. They reduce your capacity of your boom depending on how far you extend or deploy your stabilizer beams.
Yeah. So I know there's a lot of cranes to compare to on this, but is there a general rule of thumb of a reduction of capacity by reducing those outriggers? So if I reduce the outriggers 50%, am I reducing my capacity 50%? Generally, are we safe to say that would be somewhere around there, or our capacity would still be up maybe 60, 70%?
The more you reduce, the more percentage-wise it will reduce. So
Right.
if you're 3/4 of the way out, it will be just under 3/4 of the chart. But if you're halfway out, it'll probably drop it down to 30%.
Yeah,
If
okay.
you're 25% out, it won't even let you lift,
Right.
but it'll barely allow you to turn to that side or even be able to extend your boom empty a few feet. So it restricts proportionally more and more the less the outriggers deployed.
Right.
If I'm trying to explain that best
Yeah.
way I can there.
Yeah, no, I was just looking
That's
more
what-
for a percentage of load that's decreased, like just a general rule. Like, if I know my capacity is, X amount of 1,000 pounds out there, I can pick at 100% outrigger capacity. If I bring it 50, am I going to have to reduce my total weight out there by 50%? If I wanted a 3,000 pound pick, now do I have to take a 1,500 pound pick?
It would be less than that.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'd be less than that.
Okay.
It wouldn't be 50%. It would be below 50% for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
But generally, on knucklebooms, almost all knucklebooms basically are operated with a remote control. And you have a computer display on your handheld that shows you the percentage that you're able to pick, based on how far your stabilizer legs are deployed. So it gives you a bit of a guide.
Yeah.
The actual screen on your computer.
There's no doubt
from your crane.
that fully extending to your working side is always your best option.
Yep.
Always your best option.
Right.
I don't know very many scenarios other than, like, say, Elmer talking about being in that alleyway in New York, but that's virtually a straight up lift. There's not much side to it. So that's actually a really safe lift if you're going to be out 50%. That's probably the best case scenario. But in the tree industry in particular, I personally, if I was operating a truck, I'd want to have full outriggers to my working side all the time.
Yeah. 100%.
In a tree care industry, whether you're using a stick boom crane or a knuckleboom crane, you're force feeding the boom a load. So what I mean, not that you're forcing it, but in effect, you're latching onto a piece that you're not picking off the ground that the overload can stop you if it's too heavy. You have to be a calculator on behalf of the crane because, once you make that cut on that piece that you've rigged around, you're dedicating that crane to that piece.
You own it.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
own it.
You're forcing the crane to own it.
Oh, yeah. I've had my
So-
hand shake before. I know how that feels.
As we know, whether it's a stick boom crane or a knuckleboom crane, the dynamic and the concept is the same. You need to be fully aware of what your crane or your knuckleboom is able to handle at that, for example, 70-foot radius. If your load chart says you can only do 1,000 pounds total, well, then you better make sure that what you're latching onto is going to be under that 1,000. In fact, in the familiarization that happens with when we sell knuckleboom, customers always taught that be safe. Go 50%. So if you know that your crane can handle 1,000 pounds at that particular position, make a cut that's 500 pounds to allow for a bit of a boom bounce or a bit of a shock
Dynamic load, yeah.
So typically it's much again the dynamic of.
But I was on a job site one day, and we took down 2 trees identical, probably about 60 feet apart. But one was on the high part of the yard, one was on the low part of the yard. They'd had rain 3 days beforehand, but the ground seemed dry to me. We took down the first tree on the high side, and we were able to make these big cuts. And then we got to the other tree, and we were taking down the same tree. And all of a sudden, you couldn't handle the same cuts. And yet it was just because of the moisture in the tree. It was different in the one tree than the other tree. So you always got to start off like with caution and you guys understand moisture levels in trees and stuff. I don't get it all, but you got to be prepared for that,
Right.
because like you say, if you either you're slinging a load or you're cutting a load. Once you have it on the boom owns it. So you gotta make sure you're. That's why outrigger stabilizers should always be deployed 100% if you can, and on stable ground with good pads underneath, and always understand what you're cutting the best way possible, and start small. So
Right.
that's the rule of thumb that I always tell everybody.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Yep. This is great. My mind's racing all over the place about all these different things we could talk about, but we talked a little bit about remotes, and that is a major benefit to Knuckleboom cranes, being able to run it off of a remote. And then you spoke a little bit about it's based on percentages, right? And I think this is something for people getting into this, is that conversion and understanding how percentages relate to pounds. And one is by experience, and kind of getting used to know what bringing your 80% on your main boom equals to as far as pounds in lifting something up. Can you guys elaborate a little bit on that percentage, or any tricks that people may have to use to understand more about lifting?
My rule of thumb is always start small. You're starting your day, you're in this tree, and err on the side of caution. Just take a smaller cut until you get a feel for exactly what you're taking down, and you can see the percentage of load every time you're making the cut. Like when you're topping a tree, it's pretty easy. You're never really going to get into an overload situation unless it's one of those live
Unless you
oaks.
take half the tree.
Yeah, well, yeah, true. Or one of those big live oaks that's pretty big up top, and I've only been on a couple sites and seen that. But most of the time, it's just start small and feel out, every day. It's no different. Like the one thing about the tree industry is it's always trying to basically kill you. You know what I mean? Like it's a dangerous job, and a knuckle boom cutting a tree makes it much easier and safer. Even talking about the remote control and say, well, now I'm not attached to the truck. Like if you're operating the stick boom, you're part of the truck. Well, like power lines and so forth are, a major issue. You're not touching the truck anymore, so you're not going to electrocute yourself. But caution, just as far as how you start your day, how you're making your cuts. Every job's different. Every dynamic is different. You can go from one job to the next job, and it's a completely different tree. It's a completely different. The ground's different. Everything's different, and so you got to kind of just always be cautious of what you're picking.
So can you guys explain, kind of paint a picture for what the chart looks like on the screen for people that have never ran a Knuckleboom? When they're looking down and they're seeing all these percentages, like what are they for? How does that look?
I can, on a technical level, and you can speak to this too, because we onboarded.
I'm the host. I don't.
We onboarded you. I've watched you run your crane, but you're actually getting a lot of feedback from multiple sensors and the geometry of the crane as well. So you're getting feedback from maybe a beacon light that's up on the oil tank. You're getting some yellow, red, or greens, and you're also getting your percentages. And I find that as people become more comfortable and on board with these trucks, that they're running and they don't even want to talk to you, because they're looking at all the geometry of their boom systems, and they're trying not to dead end a cylinder, because that could give you a false overload, because it's based on pressure and length and all these other technical things. And they ultimately become one with the crane. Would you not agree, Jeff, that they become automatic, like with the and they know that if it's popping an amber warning that, hey, I'm gonna slow down. Another feature with the remote, they got 5 speeds that they can start slowing down. So as they increase their radius into a sector, they don't 2 inches on the turret with 70 feet, the boom tip could swing to 8 feet. So the operator has the capability of slowing down every function of that crane as he increases radius. So as he slows down, he's not shock loading, and he's going to get that feedback into the screen. So I don't think there's a clear answer on how they disseminate, but they become very good at knowing what that crane can do.
Yeah.
Like Jeff said, start out small, learn the equipment, but to just arbitrarily say 70% equals 1,800 pounds, like that's just a random thing. So it takes some time.
Yeah. You got to learn it for yourself as you're doing it.
And you know, we entrust professionals to help us put our stuff in the field. So that's another nice factor that we have as well.
So where I'm going with this for listeners is, you know, with the standard traditional stick boom crane, typically you have an LMI on there. So it's going to read and sense your weight. And with a knuckle boom crane, you're going to have your percentages shown on your screen per boom section and jib, right? So it may look something, you may go fully extended and you're out at, 40, 45 degrees, and you may see your screen read from your main boom, 60%, 40%, 30, 15, or something like that, depending. I'm just giving random numbers here. So knowing what the percentages on each boom is, not under load, is crucial. Mm-hmm. How do you know if it's overloaded if you're not lifting anything? So kind of studying your crane in different positions and what those percentages look like without being under load will help you initially,
yes,
as you're picking something up or taking a piece, out of a tree, how it's going to change on all those booms and how you're going to articulate that boom to reduce certain loads on certain booms when you need to.
Correct.
Yep.
Right.
That's a major difference between stick and knuckle, because all you got is load radius. So amount of stick out and how far out and what your angle of your boom is, and that's real simple. With a knuckle boom, you've got a lot more dynamics because you can be up with your main, over with your jib. And depending on what your main angle is going to affect what your jib capacity is, obviously. So it's learning it, exactly what you're saying. When we in-service, we use New Jersey crane training. They're tree guys. They're fourth generation tree guys. They speak the same language and they understand the dynamic of taking down the tree. Mm-hmm. How to do it professionally, how to do it the right way, the way that anybody would. And they show you how to use the truck to do it safely as well. Mm-hmm. So paying attention during that process and seeing that process play out, you learn a lot of that, but messing with it yourself and just saying, hey, here's what I can do empty. You can get it into overload situations, like Brian said, just by dead ending.
Right.
But the basic element really is familiarizing yourself with the load chart. So the load chart's very clear on what it can handle when you have the jib. And most of the time with the knuckle booms, you have the jib, the hydraulic jib attached, which is in essence the third arm on the knuckle, and you got the grapple saw. And so a lot of times you'll see if you got your boom in 70-degree angle and your jib fully extended, it tells you it can handle 1,000 pounds or 2,000 pounds, whatever the case. Familiarize yourself with the load chart at different points if you're not really sure.
And it's no different than familiarizing yourself with the weight of the trees. You guys know by the diameter of what you're going to cut what an 8-foot piece generally is going to weigh. And I've seen guys even have little charts on their trucks that they've put out saying, oh, an 18-inch, this is what your weight is. And I go, wow, that's great to see that. But you guys know that dynamic because you learned it. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with the crane. Just know what you can lift in what areas. No problems.
Right. So great. We talked about, these cranes being, more compact knuckle boom cranes than stick cranes. The versatility we went over, talking about knuckle boom cranes now, how they have evolved, are to the point where, they can do everything a stick crane can do. There's things that a stick crane can't do that a knuckle boom crane can do. So, I think the pros and cons is everything. And it's not so much saying, oh man, you got to have this, and this is the best way. I think there's a time and a place for everything, but knuckle boom cranes have gotten to the point where they're so versatile and there's so many more pros to it. It's very enticing to,
and one
go with the knuckle boom crane.
When we were offline and you said, that you trying to get the message across that, hey guys, you just didn't buy a grapple saw truck, you bought a crane truck. So there's so many other applications that crane truck could be utilized for in possibly someone's operation. Right. So it's yeah, it's a very versatile tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we went over a lot of great stuff here. Just by learning from industry experts, getting little tips and tricks, and understanding more how these cranes function, work, the specs behind them is great. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. It means a lot to the people listening. And if they could take that one thing away and learn something about a crane, especially for a lot of people out there who've been running cranes for a long time that never really gotten into the education behind it, they just got put on a crane. Every little thing is helpful. So thanks, Brian. Thanks, Elemer. Thanks, Jeff. You guys were great. Appreciate you being on the show. Can't wait to have another crane talk here soon and get some more information out for the people. So till next time, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.